Good afternoon and welcome to today's guest speaker series. My name is Gabriella Zwar, and the Career Service Advisor here at GIA. It is an honor to have with us Sheahan Stephen, a renowned sapphire merchant with over 18 years of experience in the trade and also president of Sheahan Stephen Sapphires. Join me in welcoming him to the stage as he shares his insights on innovation in the gem trade. And this is also a very interactive session, so please feel free to ask questions and engage. Thank you.
Thanks, Gabriella. As Gabriella mentioned, my name is Sheahan Stephen. I've been in the industry for 18 years, and my background is actually more from the tech industry. But I really was interested in helping out Sri Lanka. That was the primary goal. And so, over the years, initially, I was just going back a couple of times a year. And when the financial crisis of 2008 hit, that's the point at which I vertically integrated the company. And so I spent a substantial amount of time in Sri Lanka, basically anywhere from 4 to 8 weeks each trip. And I think the benefit of that was I came out of those trips with an immense amount of knowledge. And it really helped me understand different parts of the culture. It was also a time when there was a lot of conflict going on, and trying to find a way to find a solution to that was important for me. And knowing the Sri Lankan culture, everybody loves education. They want to improve their lives, and they want to make money. And I felt like those three things I was able to help. I can help them as long as they were willing to learn. And so my presentation today is on innovation, and these are innovations that I believe have impacted and changed the industry for the better. And understanding how these innovations work will better help you understand what's going on in the back end and how that's making it a more sustainable business. So today's generation really cares about sustainability, transparency, and for the most part, they're willing to pay for it, for the most part. Disease, political instability, socioeconomic issues, and war. I think they're at the forefront of a lot of these issues in developing countries, and unfortunately, most of the mining regions globally they're developing, and so these are things that we can kind of grasp and help develop to help improve the culture and the livelihoods of people. The interesting part is Gen Z has insisted on sustainability, ethical and transparent products, has pushed our industry to be more accepting of technology. I think this is key right now. And I'll hit on it briefly, even though the presentation is primarily on innovation. But as technology continues to develop, and especially with the implementation of blockchain and AI, the accuracy of data that comes out of the laboratories and the accuracy of information, especially when it comes to origin determination, should improve substantially. And I think that can go back into the supply chain and help improve the supply chain as far as the flow of the product from source to consumer. The three innovations that I will discuss are electric heating, color stability test, and blockchain technology. And I will reference back to the applications outside of the industry and then bring it back to the industry and how it's helping improve transparency and accuracy of different aspects of the gemstone supply chain. I will answer questions at the end of each section. So the first This is nothing new. This is over 1,000 years old. Blowpipe heating, primarily used to reduce color or remove pinkish to purple hues of in sapphire. Typically lasts 1.5 hours, can go up to 48 hours with as many as 12 burners. So if you can imagine, 12 burners mean there are 12 pipes, and they just basically go around in a circle, blowing in the crucible. So if none of you have seen, that's a crucible right there, and there's just one burner here. We'll just blow on that for, I think this guy went for about 45 minutes. Right now, I've noticed that this method is used, I have used it quite regularly to reduce color in Australian sapphires. So, if any of you guys are familiar, Australian sapphires are typically a very dark color. And it'll reduce the color and improve its liveliness. And so, yeah, I think that's one application currently, but also with other colors, primarily blue with let's say an area of pink or purple. You can remove the pink and purple and give it an even blue color using this method. Like I said, it can run anywhere from 1 to 1.5 hours, and I've seen longer as well. But yeah, anyone have any questions about this method? No? Okay. Yes?
Quick question. Are there any that use things such as billows or anything more advanced to maintain the air, or is it almost always done purely just by blowing?
Yeah, so actually, the funny part is the billows were used before the pipe. So yeah, they'd use bellow to basically squeeze air and try to increase the temperature. But I believe that the pipe method was able to reach a higher temperature. But yeah, I've seen one at one of my employees' house under their dining room table. This is high temperature heating, and I think this was a major game changer in the industry. Are you guys familiar with Gouda? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the discovery of Gouda, which is a rough sapphire, it was discovered in the 70s, and essentially, when this material is heated, it will obtain a exceptional blue color, and I would say about 70 to 75% of all sapphires today are derived from Gouda. And so there are a few varieties of Gouda. The names are all Sri Lankan. So Ottu, Diesel, Dum. And depending on the variety, it will achieve a very specific color, depending on the amount of inclusions that are present. So each type of Gouda has a specific identifying factor, which will also give you a predictable outcome. And depending on how much of those inclusions are present, you will get a predictable outcome, like I said. Mr. Dhanapala here, he taught me everything I know about heat treatment. He was a wizard on heating, and unfortunately he passed during the pandemic. But that's the important part about education, because when there are incredible people who have immense amounts of knowledge, and they're able to pass that information to the next generation, or just someone who's eager to learn, it carries on. It's his legacy, even though he's not here anymore. So always grateful for him. And, even though I don't speak the language, he gave me a book in Sinhalese about burning, which I'll have to have translated. But so this method, just for a quick reference point, previously it's gas, liquid propane, and it's able to achieve a temperature up to melting. So typically heating sapphires, 1300 to 1950, the temperature point, and the time varies by the type of gyoda. There are multiple derivatives of gyoda, so they can have combinations of two. And I think the numbers can get pretty crazy when you add all the derivatives together. But depending on the type of gyoda, you can determine the time and the temperature that you need to heat. For the most part, in the 1800 to 1950 range is what most of the gyoda is heated up to. But I think it's an incredible innovation from the 70s, like I said, and it changed the industry, especially with corundum, sapphire, blue, and a lot of the gyoda rough was tossed into fish tanks or rock gardens. So people were going back to their gardens and fish tanks to pull them out and use them. Any questions on this method? Well, I'll briefly explain the heating process. It starts at room temperature, and they go through a process called soak and cycle. And so when they start at room temperature, they're going to ramp the temperature up. It has to be done relatively gradually, otherwise the stones can actually crack. So so if they start at, let's say room temperature is 100 degrees, I would say in the beginning, they would cycle roughly every 30 minutes, and they'll increase the temperature up from 100 to, let's say, 150, then 250, 300. And what they do is when they soak, they keep it at that temperature for another 30 minutes. But it's also up to the burner, the master burner, to determine how long they want to soak it for and how quickly they change the temperature. And that just comes down to experience. So, in the case with gyoda, it could be anywhere in that 1300 to 1950 range. And they'll soak all the way up to 1950 and they'll cycle all the way up to 1950 with incremental soaking. And that would probably take about 3 hours to get up to its optimal temperature. And once it reaches that, they'll just leave it there until it's time to ramp down. And that ramping down could occur anywhere in that 5 to 7 hour range. and then it just cools off. Any questions about high temperature heating? Yes?
How many stones can be placed in that container?
Like this furnace that we were that we were looking at, it can hold 3 crucibles. I'd say one crucible is about half of this cup. And so you just stack them one on top of the other. And so the downfall of this method is you can't stop it and restart it. Once you start, you have to let it burn all the way through. And you're not going to obtain optimal color when you stop. So that was the primary factor why there was development with the next heating method, and that's called the electric furnace. So this method, also known as the Punseri method, I'm going to say it started right around 2009. There was a lot of skepticism about it because no one knew exactly what it did. But actually, it ended up being a much more sustainable method because you can burn a sapphire for 6 months. I got caught to that. No one wants their capital stuck in a furnace for 6 months. But ideally, we want it out, within a few days. But I did have a sapphire that got, like a substantial one that got stuck in an electric furnace for 6 months. And at the time of this development, there was a lot of skepticism, like what is actually going on in this furnace. A lot of talk about possible diffusion and what sort of chemicals are being added or impregnated into the stone. But Punseri actually brought GIA down to Sri Lanka, and he ran a trial so they can observe what was occurring. And so basically, at this point, I'd say about 75 to 80% of all blue sapphire goes through a electric furnace. Highly controlled environment, controlling the time and temperature for an extended period of time makes it possible to obtain premium color, top. And the one thing about that I've noticed is that a lot of these stones are coming out loop clean. So I would say the rarity of an unheated sapphire and the rarity of a loop clean sapphire is almost the same. If you can obtain top color, top royal blue, top cornflower blue, and it's loop clean, both unheated and the heated loop clean stones are extremely rare. Any questions on this? Okay. 95% of all sapphires are heated. Did you guys know that? 5% blowpipe, 25% high temperature, gas heating, 75% electric. 99% of all blue sapphires are heated. The electric furnace operating tolerances, room temperature to 3,000 well past its melting point of 2050. Operating time can range between, like I said, 1 week to 6 months if needed. And it's always in a nitrogen-oxygen environment. The standard high temperature heating, the one with the crucibles in there, that is liquid propane oxygen. So they adjust the amount of each propane and oxygen to obtain the temperature that they need. Any more questions? Yes?
You know what the ratio of nitrogen to oxygen they're using?
I think we can see that right here. About 100 here. That's N2, and O2 is about 25. But yeah, the first time I saw one of these furnaces was, I want to say, 2015. It was a big secret in Sri Lanka for a long time. I don't believe there are more than maybe 3 or 4 of these in Sri Lanka. I don't know if they're available in Bangkok. I'm sure they are, but development was again on Sri. As I've mentioned here, this method was developed to extend the soak cycle and cooling process. Electric heating will always be the second phase of high temperature. Second phase meaning they'll always put it into a standard gas furnace, and then when that completes, they'll put it into the electric high temperature. So here's an example. Lupline 550, I think it was 556. Super rare as far as its clarity, beautiful color, and yeah, it's just an exceptional stone. Any questions? No?
So why would they go and set it from the high temperature furnace into an electric furnace? Is that just to make sure you have the perfect color?
Perfect color. Yeah, it's a more controlled environment with the electric furnace. And so first phase gas, second phase electric. Otherwise, you would just have to keep changing out gas, like the propane cylinders every 7 hours. It's just not practical.
Okay.
The next innovation that I'll speak on is the fade test. Are you guys familiar with that? Are you familiar that 30% of Madagascar sapphires that fall in the yellow, pink, Patraja, and purple sapphire range will fade? 30%. I mean, it's a substantial amount. And actually, this year in Tucson, I had one stone that faded, and it goes to the extent of me trying to reiterate validation. Validation is extremely important, and I mean, slightly diverting from the presentation, but validation will give you the opportunity to still continue to purchase in your standard method, but always use human validation, laboratory validation, and technology validation. I think those 3 are there for a reason, and just wanted to keep developing all 3. And we'll get further into blockchain, and I didn't put AI in here because I felt it was just going to go too long. But those are all incredible tools to make sure that you get what you ask for. And while we're on that topic, if you're making transactions online, make sure to have the supplier guarantee that they will accept the stone back, including payment for the certificate if it falls out of the range of what you expect it to be. I think that's it needs to be put in a contract form now. Otherwise, people are being taken advantage of left and right. A lot of times, I was telling Gabriella during lunch today, a lot of times, a lot of the dealers that are selling via social media, they don't know what they're selling. And I think the automatic assumption is that they do, because they're in a source country. So it's important that you put those words in place so that you don't get burnt. Even with my 18 years experience, I looked at it in February. It looked stable. I tested it at home. It looked stable, but I did the testing correctly. Yeah, it was submitted and it turned clear. So we don't want that. And the only mistake I made was I didn't, verbalize that I want to be paid for the certification, because it shouldn't be my problem. It should be the seller's problem if they're not going through the steps to verify that their product is legit and stable. So moving on, the color stability test. I'm going to tell you a little story. 2014, I started buying Madagascar sapphires, and 2014 I bought a few smaller yellows, probably in the 90 to like carat 10. And I was on the road, and I sold one of these yellow sapphires to a customer in Oregon. And like 2 weeks after the sale, she called me frantic. She just said, "Sheahan, the customer's coming to pick it up tomorrow, and the color's gone. What do I do?" So, done up all of the master burner, I call him up, and it's an issue of light and temperature. And so when I called him, he just said, "Tell the customer to put it in their mouth for an hour, and then under UV light for another hour. The color will come back." And that's where I realized the color loss is coming in a specific temperature range, hence mouth. And then UV light is the standard for bringing or testing the stability. But the primitive method is in the mouth. So again, to go back, pink, Padparaja, orange, yellow are 30% unstable from Madagascar. So just be very wary of that when you're looking at them. And I think they're also distinctive, if you're not certain about the origin, they're very distinctive characteristics for Madagascar sapphire. So do your research there, and you can test accordingly. I would say the Sri Lankan sapphire is fading 10%, but Madagascar is right around 30. So here's an example of the fade test. Potentially unstable color center known as trapped hole is a naturally occurring phenomenon in yellow sapphires that test would require placing the stone under a daylight lamp and heat lamp for up to 3 hours. So basically you're activating and deactivating. And it's been simplified even further because you can actually just use a LED light to activate and a UV light to deactivate. That's it. And that was the mistake. I didn't know I needed to do both. I just did only the UV light, and I didn't use an LED to deactivate. So something to just keep in mind. It's a very simple test. I also, at my office, I leave it on my on my windowsill, and for an hour, to see if there's a color change, and then deactivate it with a handheld torch. Amazon, you can buy it for like $30, and you can actually build it into your office, the lamp. Yeah, so you can see relax and active. A lot of the laboratories now, or if it falls within a range where the color doesn't completely disappear, it looks like it looks more of a color shift, but it falls in that range of acceptable for the laboratories. And so I have a number of Padparajas that shift in color or their intensity, but because it still falls within the Padparaja range, it's still acceptable. Here's some examples of color change and how it has impacted the hue and the saturation. I found to bring back the relaxed color, heat plus UV must be done relatively quickly. So one example, in Hong Kong, I think it was 2015, it was like a 9-carat yellow sapphire. It was just the temperature and the light from the showcase lost color for that, but no one caught that the color was diminishing, and it ended up being permanent. So we lost a 9-carat stone because we could reactivate the color if it was caught in time, maybe within the day, but going through 5-6 days didn't work. So random sample of 40 sapphires, 12 from Sri Lanka, and 1 changed color from 28 from Madagascar, 11 changed color. So there's the percentages. Gradient papyraja, which shifts. If the color shifts, each color will be graded if each color falls within the range, acceptable papyraja range. The certificate should indicate papyraja. So this still fell within the papyraja range. And even though that there's some shift in color, if the color shift is strong and brings out a dominant pink or orange, the certificate will note fancy colored sapphire. Side note, tungsten heating lamps can expand inclusions. Be sure to discuss with the lab. So there are some disclosures that the heat and the lamp can expand inclusions. So you need to be cautious of that. Nowadays, I think the laboratories will have you sign a disclosure saying that you understand the risk and that you're accepting. So know that before you submit. Any questions on the fade test? Yes.
If a stone is like faded and then heated and treated to restore the color, if that happens multiple times, will it still be able to restore the color to the same degree as the first time?
Here's the interesting part, and this is only my observation. This only occurs with unheated stones.
Oh.
Yeah.
After you restore the color, it doesn't fade?
It potentially can. It can permanently be unstable. But unheated color loss versus, I have not yet seen for example, a yellow sapphire that's heated lose its color. So, does that answer your question? Kind of?
And more like this treatment we're talking about to make the color more active.
It's not actually a treatment, it's just a test. We're testing to make sure that, for example, you buy a papyraja. Mm-hmm. You want it to stay a papyraja. Mm-hmm. So you want to have it tested to make sure it stays within the papyraja tolerance. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's not a treatment, it's just a phenomenon. Mm-hmm. And you want to make sure that, the value between a papyraja and, a pink sapphire can be substantial. Mm-hmm. So, you lose value, stone loses its price. So, yeah. Yes?
When you hit it with the UV light, are you going with shortwave or long wave?
It's shortwave. Yeah.
And then when you hit it with the torch, do you know how many lumens that torch is? And it's white light, right?
Yeah. It's, don't quote me on this, but I think it's about 10,000.
Oh, cool.
Anyone?
How long do you have to leave it in shortwave?
The recommendation is 15 minutes, but usually I'll do it for even 2 hours. It's not going to damage the stone. If anything, you're going to get a more accurate idea of if there could be a color change.
And you can also just use natural UV from the sunlight?
Yeah. So in Sri Lanka, that's what I do. You just leave it on a windowsill. But you have to deactivate it as well.
With the cool light?
Yes. But it's good to know,
Do we know what color changing element this is in the sapphire that's causing this?
I don't know. I wrote this presentation 2 years ago that might have been further developed. But at this point, I don't know. But I do know that some of the labs in Europe have, and I think along with GIA and AGO, they have further developed a better understanding of what's causing it. I think it's more terminology based. So better use of words to describe what's occurring. Stable color test. In the case of this certified papyraja, it's a win-win due to the fact I knew the Origin was Madagascar and is unheated with no color shift. Tools required for the test: UV light, daylight lamp, tungsten heat lamp. Understanding the price point, being able to fully disclose to the customer. So I really think it's important that you understand the test. But that's more me. I mean, I enjoy validating everything and making sure that there's a guarantee in what I'm doing. But to each their own. I think the test itself is pretty simple. I don't think there's too much complexity. I think initially when it was occurring, it sounded very scary, sapphire in your mouth. But at this point, it's pretty streamlined, and I believe that you can actually do the test at home or in your office. Any questions? Yes.
You aware of, or have you seen many rubies being artificially irradiated and having an unstable color?
Rubies, no. I haven't seen this with ruby. It's primarily pink sapphire, yellow sapphire, purple sapphire, but barrage. Some orange as well. I haven't heard anything about rubies. It's not to say that it's not possible, but at this point, I haven't. Anyone else? Okay. As long as there are new discoveries, there will be a need for new innovations. I think that's really important to keep in mind as technology keeps developing, and it's developing faster and faster. And I think it's important for us to know how to use the technology to our advantage to further our knowledge and education. Understanding blockchain. And so this was brought to my attention in 2017 by a very important customer. It's probably the largest, most popular brand in the United States. And I would say 2017 was the year that the industry really got to know what I do in a vertically integrated model. And they wanted to really understand, can blockchain be used in to validate the origin of a sapphire? Again, for all of you that are not familiar with blockchain, it was initially the concept and the idea of it. It was derived from the financial industry to track money, and basically, you can see here, they make little blocks, and each block, you can make them into blocks of, let's say, 4 people. And these people are all validators in their own, and they store information. But the people within these blocks, they don't know each other. So does blockchain validate that and guarantee that the origin of information or the origin of a gemstone, let's say, is 100% accurate? When this company brought this to my attention and how we can implement it into our supply chain, it's not possible, because they were looking for guarantees that that are manually entered. The only part of blockchain that I would say is like there's some level of authenticity to it is typically the people involved in the process, they don't know each other. So the chance of there being some sort of counterfeit is slim to none. But again, it's all human entered. It's not, the data is all human derived. But at this point, I'm starting to believe that in conjunction with other technology, such as AI, it makes both even more accurate, if that makes sense. Yeah. So it was just a matter of time. And I think a lot of people, a lot of companies are eager to implement new technologies, but sometimes the implementation is to come at the right time not necessarily as soon as the technology comes to market. So considering this has been around since the 80s, we're looking at 40 years, it really only hit our industry in the last 5-6 years, our industry. So it's worth keeping in mind how it works. And do you guys have any questions about how the information works? Each block compiles data, and it's essentially human driven. It's not in our industry. It's primarily human driven, but the humans don't know each other. And then when you're compiling the data, and it comes to the eventual end user and source, you can bring all the data together and make sure that the information is accurate, because it's compiled by different people around the world. Any questions on this? Yes?
Yeah, so how would the end user phase, end user kind of experience be, right? And what's actually this concept of these four people don't knowing each other and validating a stone, right? So
Yeah.
let's make it, in a sense, how does a practical example for this look like?
Yeah, so the cool thing is documentation is very easy. You have different sources for different information, or for the same information, to validate the stone. And as long as those different, yes?
So that would be a lab, for example.
Well, one could be a lab, yeah. But you want different sources of validation. I think that's why we come to a consensus that the stone is what it is. So when in currency trading, this was initially for finance. When there are major financial transactions, we want to make sure that the person who's receiving that transaction gets the amount that they want. And so when they implement blockchain, it's a guarantee in some ways that it is the amount that was initially initiated, let's say. Yes?
Yeah. So in this value chain of a stone, right?
Yes.
That would mean that the stone has to be in the hands of let's say at least, I don't know, 3 or 4 blocks that each validate the stone to get conclusion, right?
Well, these are good questions. So it doesn't mean that the stone is changing hands constantly, but the information is going to different blocks. That makes sense.
But the information would be the stone itself, right?
The information would be derived from the stone.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So one source of information that we're familiar with is a lab report. And and that would be one block. So now if you do multiple lab reports, you got multiple blocks. Is the information the same? Yes, no. If it's the same, then it's validated. If it's not, we might have to go back and figure out why it's different. So we're seeing this so much with the origin determination. I think the laboratories across the board are having a difficult time with that. And the supply chain still needs human interaction. And unfortunately, I believe, this is just my take, I believe that the supply chain from 4 years of shutdown has been impacted, even at the laboratory level, with all the scientific information that's available to test images and AI. I think there's still a lack of human interaction with the labs to determine its accuracy. I think human interaction is an important part. Yes? Anybody else?
When you say a lack of human interaction with labs, do you mean the customer's not coming back and asking questions, or what?
No, I believe that laboratories need specially sourced dealers that are spending significant amount of time at the source. And the source dealers typically, only if they're going and sitting in an office, they might not know anything. But if they're spending time in the field, testing stones, analyzing, understanding what's coming from where, they're able to pass that information on to the laboratory. And laboratories are heavily dependent on source dealers to produce produce samples. They collect their own, but I think samples are important for them to have a reference collection. And I think that actually, because we go through so many steps of validation, all my synthetics that we catch, I donate it to labs so that they get better familiarity with it. So, yeah. Any questions? Can we move on? Yeah. The concept and the idea was first proposed in 1982. The objective was to implement a system where a document is time-stamped and not tampered with. So once it's time-stamped, you can't change the data. You have to build a new block. In 2008, the design was improved by time-stamping blocks, which would not require them to be verified by a third party. 2009, implementation and application in the form of Bitcoin. 2014, Ethereum, and so on. Different forms of cryptocurrency. We're using blockchain to validate transactions. Primary applications, crypto, banking, electronic contracts. Secondary application, any process which requires supply chain management, farming, fishing, and high-value commodities, which would include gemstones. I really believe that it's a useful tool in conjunction with human validation and laboratories. Any question? So here's an example with the wine industry and their use of blockchain. So you see up top, the supplier, freight operation, and importer. And we can see the different movements of the wine as it goes through its supply chain. Any questions on this? In mining, blockchain, step one, an individual rough stone is added to the blockchain along with supporting documentation. As I said, there's a block which is made for each step. And that block timestamped and validated. A block is created on the blockchain and the stone obtains a unique ID number. Step two, a gem cutter purchases the rough stone, new data characterizing the now cut and polished gem can be added to the blockchain. Step three, a jeweler buys the cut and store stone and mounts it in a ring for retail sale. New data on the manufacturing of the ring can be added to the blockchain. And then step four is the consumer. It's really pretty simple. I think sometimes things can seem a little bit more complex than it might need to be. But again, I believe that these processes of validation are important because one process, laboratory, your human testing, and blockchain and AI in conjunction can validate the product really well. So, blockchain for diamonds. You got the producers, manufacturers, and each step is going to have a block, and it's going to go to registrars and retailers, and then the consumer. I think GIA has been using this for quite some time. Key questions to keep in mind: cost of implementation, and what I've seen is over time, the cost of something new will typically go down. And you don't need to hire a third party. You can usually implement this type of process for much less from your office, as long as you have trustworthy employees. Cost of implementation, ASM of colored gemstone sites are typically less than 10 miners. And that's it. Thank you. Any other questions? Yes.
At JCK, what were some standout things or treatments or just what you've heard out there in the industry, Sapphire specifically?
We chatted about this earlier today. And I think supply chain management is probably the most critical point that I see moving forward. I think that we want to get closer and closer to where things were pre-pandemic. Obviously, over a period of 3 years, people were just trying to survive, and they found new ways of doing business with source countries. But the accuracy of the product has gone down drastically, and the prices have gone up. And I don't know too many people who want to buy an inferior stone for a higher price. So I think the goal moving forward, and I did a presentation with JCK Talks on transparency. I think our goal as an industry should be to get closer to where things were pre-pandemic. And hopefully we can achieve that, but it has to be through some level of unity. I don't think this is a problem that can be fixed by a single individual. And I think it's causing a lot of disruption. But if all of us see a common goal, and we don't need to wait until it's a disaster, I think we can all work and do our part. But bringing back a structured supply chain is really important. That was my primary takeaway, and that's what I lectured to everybody about. I think there's my projection. I see possibly like 20% of the dealers could shrink. 20% is substantial. And I was telling Gabriella during lunch, I think it's social media driven because social media it's not a validator. Anyone can see what they want. And I think at the end of the day, a quality product needs to be validated and guaranteed, not just sold. I understand survival, and during the pandemic, a lot of people were trying to just survive. But as we come out of it, bringing some level of structure to how gemstones move. So that was my JCK takeaway. Yes.
How can source dealers help with the validation in the blockchain process?
Yeah, that's a good question. Like I said, blockchain can be implemented third party, or you can implement it in your own office. And so I think it's option. I think too many dealers are just looking to like flip a stone and get their money and walk away. But source dealers have the ability to put and implement a guarantee of source, not just the certificate, but here's where it's coming from. Here are the people who dug it up, and here's the process in which the stones went through. The tricky place is because of the state of the supply chain right now. People got used to buying in a certain way. And the more time and the more effort that goes into guaranteeing a stone, it's going to cost more. So there are people who are able to manipulate that, the cost. And then there's some people who can't. I mean, they just want it for as cheap as they can get it. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.